things theology, all things theology. We chop it up properly, without an apology. Gotta give doxology to God hollow, because this is how we do it at All Things Theology.
Yo, grace and peace, guys. Welcome back to another episode of All Things Theology, where I'm your host, Kdubtru, and today we're going to be talking about transgenderism. But before we do that, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and as always, click that notification bell so you can be aware when I drop content. Yes, I recently saw a video on just browsing YouTube, and I saw that Dylan Mulvany had a sit down with President Joe Biden. Now, many of you may not be familiar with Dylan, but he is a TikTok star, and he has been most famous for transitioning and documenting each day of his transition. We'll comment more about that here in a second, but let's just play the video. Let's get right into it.
We're going to move on now to trans rights. There have been many anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced and enacted, outlawing things like gender.
I'm going to keep my comment brief on that, but I'll respond fuller later in the video. But even how the opposition is described, right? Just anti-LGBTQ, rather than no, people have actually legitimate responses to some of these things. But we'll actually get into some of the dangers here in a second, and why, just how we were described is just kind of funny.
Healthcare and banning kids from playing sports.
Healthcare. To
go deeper into this issue,
not just banning kids from playing sports, banning men entering into women's sports and dominating. Let's be honest, this doesn't happen the other way around, right? When a woman transitions to a male, we don't hear nothing about that as far as sports, right? Because we all know that athletically, for the most part, women would not perform well in men's sports. But men perform very well in women's sports. And guess what? It takes away from actual women who've trained hard all their lives. And so we'll respond fuller here in a second, but I just want to keep that brief.
Here with us today is Dylan Mulvany, who's
So this is Dylan Mulvany. We'll allow him to speak here in a second.
Welcomed us into her life by, showing on social media her girlhood series. Let's take a look.
My name is Dylan Mulvany. I am a trans woman, and I am documenting my transition publicly on TikTok for the world to see. When people started watching and the numbers kept getting higher,
I actually think a lot of what he does is insulting to real women. Yeah, I don't recognize Dylan Mulvany as an actual female, right? I live in reality. Biologically, he is a male. Putting on woman's clothing, attire, does not make you a female, right? Just like, a white person putting on blackface does not make them black. Now, I said that on Twitter not too long ago, and a lot of trans people were offended by what I said, but it's true. None of what he actually does makes him a female. Female is who you are. So I reject this day 156 of girlhood anyway, because you're not an actual female. You're not a woman, right?
Realized quickly how public my transition would be. Of course, I knew that there would be backlash and negativity. I try to not let the internet's words hurt me or my spirit. But do you know what does hurt? Seeing people in power and authority figures creating laws and bills that are actively trying to harm us trans humans.
Trying to harm you. And you watch out for the language. One thing to do throughout this video is watch for the emotive language, right? We all know harm is bad. So if you say, hey, someone's trying to harm me, the general reaction from people is, I don't need to do this. But, saying women or saying men who try to transition to a female that they can't compete in women's sports, they consider that harmful, right? Not the, mutilating of your body. That's not harmful. That's celebrated. Not the fact that, people who transition will most likely incur a lot of health risk and health defects. That's not harmful. That's to be celebrated. But saying you can't compete in women's sports, that's harm. You see how backwards that is?
Especially trans children. Our lives.
Now, talk about trans children. There are many people who were transitioned, a lot of them who, due to the pressures of their parents, right? They didn't know what they were doing. Some of these kids, 5, 6 years old, they're getting older saying, I want to detransition. And guess what? When they detransition, a lot of these kids are bullied by the trans community. But oh, we can't talk about that, right? Because once you're an oppressed group, you're seen as a victim. You can do anything, right? You've received uber rights to bully people.
To become political talking points. Lawmakers in many states want to exclude us from participating in sports or getting proper health care.
Well, one, preclude you from participating in sports. Yes, it is absolutely an unfair advantage for a male who wants to try to transition, right? Even though that's actually biologically, scientifically impossible, it is unfair for you to be able to compete in women's sports. Scientifically, men generally are stronger, faster than women. So guess what? You put a male, right? This was done in UFC, right? The transgender who competed in women's UFC and like broke her face up. See, this is what we're talking about is dangerous. But what about those women? What about the women who trained all their life? They're kind of average. They're a little above average. Maybe they're getting third every meet. And now a transgender, quote unquote, woman joins. And now they're getting fourth every meet. They've gotten knocked off the podium because of you, right? Trying to be inclusive and accepting to you. How is that fair? See, but they don't actually care about women because the transgender movement is actually the most insulting and harmful to women. But I'm just supposed to accept this. I'm supposed to not live in reality because I don't want to be seen as bigoted or transphobic. By the way, I don't have a phobia. I have no fear of trans people. I think it's unfair. Now, it's one thing for you to live in your own fantasy world, but it's another for you to try to include me in it. And then say I'm hateful for not seeing that way. Someone wants to try to be a dog, I'm not going to start barking at them, petting their head, calling them a good boy. I'm just not. They're living in their own alternate universe.
Some folks want to decide where we can use the bathroom. No one should have fear living in a state that they call...
Yes, because there have been many documented reports about people who have transitioned. And then, like I said, this stuff is so harmful to women. So harmful. But again, I think I belabored my point here.
Home while being true to themselves. No
True to themselves.
one should have their lives put in danger because of who they are inside.
Who you are inside is a biological male. But you just hear the emotive language, not rooted in truth, not rooted in science, reality. I'm just supposed to accept this. I'm just supposed to, okay. That's what we're told. Otherwise, we're creating harm if I don't accept this person's identity. Now, thankfully, people aren't consistent all the way across because if I wanted to come out as a white male, you know how much white supremacy talk I would get? Now, by the way, I don't. I'm comfortable in my own truth. Not just my own truth, reality. I'm comfortable that I am a black male. But by their own standard, anybody should be anything they want to. And guess what? We should provide resources for them to do it. So guess what? If I identify as a millionaire, you should be able to support me and provide all the resources to accept my new lifestyle, right? By what standard wouldn't you, right? If what you're saying is true. See, this is the idiocy of this all, but we'll keep going.
That's why I'm sharing my story with the world. I'm using my platform to stand up for my community and for any of the little Dylans that deserve a clear path to their true identity.
Mr. President, this is my
So now this is where the conversation begins with Dylan and President Joe Biden. Now I'm going to disagree with nearly everything President Joe Biden says, but I do want to do something that often isn't done. Now, I do have respect for the presidential office that he holds, even though I disagree with him. So I am going to voice my concern in a respectful manner as best as I can. So just going to say that up front.
121st day of publicly transitioning.
God love it.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a...
You know, he loves it, right? 221st day of publicly transitioning. He loves it. President Joe Biden says he loves it. How could you love this? You know, we have the President of the United States affirming, promoting this ideology that is not rooted in truth, science. We'll keep going.
State that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But
If it was a decision based on you and your doctor, then why are you on here publicly promoting it? See, this is the actual absurdities of the me and my doctor argument, right? This is seen in abortion as well. No, you want everybody to accept this. Because if they don't, you call them hateful and bigoted. So it's not just a decision between you and your doctor. You want the whole world to affirm this.
many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process. Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming healthcare?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that, as a moral question and as a legal question.
So now we're being told by the President of the United States that not only should people be able to get it, we should not even be able to ban it. Morally speaking, if someone wants to say, hey, they want to say it, they've been living as male, they want to go to female, he says there's a moral obligation. We are obligated morally to affirm this person. You see how backwards this is? Utterly backwards. We're living in a society that promotes absurdity, where transgenderism actually gets rid of any distinction between male and female. There really is no such thing as a biological female or male. It's what you identify as, which is absurd.
I just think it's wrong. I think I was saying before we started that my deceased son, used to be the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He passed the broadest piece of legislation that he, as Attorney General, was able to convince the legislature and the governor to sign, that dealt with all gender-affirming capability. I mean, there's a lot of, sometimes they try to block you from being able to access certain medicines, being able to access certain procedures. And so,
yeah, let's talk about some of those certain medicines, like testosterone, hormone pills, which, it's very interesting because I've been watching a lot of detransition videos. And one of the things they talk about is actually the medicines that's given to them, how it affected them, their bodies, right? One of the people that I've had a conversation with talked about, we warn people about this, the testosterone, the hormone pills when it comes to bodybuilders, but we'll turn around and give the same medicine to transgenderism. And guess what? They have to take this every day for years. And it's so harmful to the body. But again, right? All this is accepted if you're trans, right? Now, I can only imagine a couple years. Well, it's already happened now, but in 5-10 years, there's going to be numerous reports of people, coming out saying the same thing I'm saying today. There's a person that on Twitter I follow named Chloe Cole, I believe is her name, where she talks about how she's suing because of things like this, how she was lied to. She was caused to believe a lie, and so, man, it's very sad. Dylan's promoting all this stuff now, binders, all this stuff, which affects the body. But is he willing to deal? Is the President of the United States willing to deal with the repercussions of people's bodies that are damaged because of this stuff? There's things we want to know, things to consider.
none of that should be available. I mean, no state should be able to do that, in my view. So I feel very, very strongly that that you should have every single solitary right, including use of your gender identity bathrooms in public.
So the President of the United States say, hey, you should have every right not only to receive the medication, and I'm assuming sports as well, you need to go to the bathroom you identify as. If you can see the problems, then that means you're a bigot, according to the trans movement. But we'll continue.
Thank you. Thank you. And it feels like Republicans have turned trans and non-binary people into this thing to blame society's downfall on in some ways. And this narrative is not only dangerous to our mental health, but also our physical safety. And particularly trans women of color are being murdered at an alarming rate.
More than any other group of people.
Thank you. How can Democratic leaders be more effective in advocating for us?
Well, let me address that because some people may see that as like a strong argument. That doesn't actually state if the issue is right or wrong. Let me give you an example. And by the way, I am not advocating that trans people should be murdered. That's evil as well. Let's for example say, hey, people who take crack are actually more likely to be killed than people who take marijuana. That doesn't mean we allow crack cocaine to be legalized. That would be absurd. But this is essentially what this argument. Well, people are being murdered more than any other, right? Like I said, if you are viewed as an oppressed group in today's society, you are viewed as a victim. Uber rights. It's not only that you get rights, you get Uber rights. You get more rights than everybody else.
Trans people and our families and our lives and our opportunities.
I'm not being facetious when I say this, being seen with people like you. No, I mean it. I genuinely mean it. People fear what they don't know. They fear what they don't know. And when people realize, individuals realize, oh, this is what they're telling me to be frightened of?
Oh, slow down, President Biden. We're not telling people to be scared of other people. We're saying this is not rooted in science. But the left's agenda, and he admitted it, and this has been done with all the LGBT stuff, will flood TV, will flood media with people just being overwhelmed by it so that they become numb. And he says, because that's what he says, just seeing more people like you. And that has been the agenda from the LGBT community. To flood it so much that it numbs you. This is done, with a lot of things. This is done like a lot in rap. You hear so much about death, it doesn't bother you. You see so many gay people, so many trans people, it just overwhelmingly floods your brain circuits to where you're just like, oh, well, I better accept it because I don't want to be viewed as a bigot, right? This is why it's in every TV show, every it's all in sports. Just flood every place. But people who care about truth will not be swayed by seeing it a lot.
This is the problem. People change their minds. People just don't know enough to know. And it's not because of intellectual incapability, it's just lack of exposure.
The lack of exposure. So no, it's not a lack of either. I know what a female is. I know what a male is. By the way, a little plug for Matt Walsh's What is a Woman, because it gets into a lot of these issues. I thought the film did an excellent job exposing the leftist view, which is not rooted in reality. And that's the issue. That's the issue. Not me being ignorant of trans people, but me actually knowing.
And I think that it's really important that we continue to speak out about the basic fundamental rights of all human beings. And the idea that what's going on, in some states, I won't get into the politics of it, but in some states, it's outrageous, and I think it's immoral.
It's immoral. It's immoral for states to say, we will allow men to be men and man to be man. Or women to be women and man to be man. This is being called immoral. That no, we will not allow you to change your gender because you're having gender dysphoria. You're not liking your body. We will not allow you to. This is being called immoral. Interesting.
The trans part's not immoral. What they're trying to do to trans persons is immoral.
Thank you. And do you
by not accepting it. That's the immoral part. You know, because we won't accept this. I haven't heard one good argument for why biologically, scientifically, we should accept this. Not appealing to your experience or emotion, or I feel like a woman or I feel like a man. That's not an argument. Your feelings, as a popular conservative says, your feelings are not facts.
Have any messages to the families of trans folks that are seeking, options for their children, but are struggling to find resources? Do you have a message to those parents?
Yeah, I do. This is blood of your blood, bone of your bone. And it is, again, speaking to my son, when he spent a year in Iraq, and he was a decorated soldier. He volunteered.
Now, before he kind of goes off to the tangent here, there have been numerous reports that showing how unhealthy this is for children. You know, it's one thing for you to say, hey, adult can do whatever they want, but to feed this lie, to feed children, pump them full of chemicals, because how they're feeling at 5, 6 years old, which we know, oftentimes it is a phase. Most times it's a phase. To fuel them with chemicals in their body, which have been documented to be harmful at any age, let alone for a child, is to not care for children.
To go, as he had to give up the Attorney General's job, and then came back to it. And he started a foundation I'm not allowed to talk about now because I can't raise money for it any longer. But it was for abused children. And one of the things he did is raise millions of dollars, this organization, to basically educate parents as to what they should not be afraid of, and to educate the community as to what is just pure hyperbole.
You know, one of the things that, from trans kids, specifically from detransition kids that have been, I guess, from their parents have been stated, is oftentimes the parents had no idea how harmful this was going to be for their child. But again, all this is dismissed. That's the sad part about this. What about the kids who have detransitioned? Now, a lot of people will say, well, they want real trans anyway, which is very dismissive anyway. But a lot of the parents are saying, I didn't know how harmful this was to my child. And a lot of parents are struggling with their mental health. But guess what? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
And so I just think it's a matter of leaders speaking out and saying, as I told you, I mentioned a young woman who used to be in his staff, used to be in my staff, who is now a state senator. And she's trans, and she's a state senator in the state of Delaware, in an area that was historically very conservative, the part of Delaware. And she's running unopposed this time. So things are changing. Things are changing, but it's a matter of us acknowledging that there's nothing to be, just because it's different, there's nothing to be fearful about.
It's nothing to be fearful about. Yeah, you shouldn't fear, the hormonal drugs and testosterone that's given that affects people at an alarming rate. Don't fear that. Don't fear the depression and the suicide rates, because people, when they transition, oftentimes are not satisfied with their bodies. Don't ignore the man behind the curtain, so to speak. I don't fear trans people. I fear the results of what will happen when people try to become trans. I fear a society who cannot tell the difference between a biological male, biological female. I do fear the downward spiral that happens. But ultimately, my trust is in God, who is sovereign over all things. But notice once in that whole section of that interview, it was assumed trans is right rather than proven. As a matter of fact, if you disagree, you're immoral. That I will say to you multiple times. If essentially, if you're not for trans right, it is immoral for you not to allow this. Very bizarre, but I hope you found this video interesting. Just the fact that this is being presented from the Oval Office, from the top of the head, so to speak, from the head of state. This is being presented as fact, as scientific, as biological, as truth that we must all accept, or you're immoral. I just wanted to play that. Hopefully you enjoyed my response. Again, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Till the next time, grace and peace.